On Friday, Donald Trump posted, "I absolutely love that Colbert got fired. His talent was even less than his ratings." How dare you, sir? Would an untalented man be able to compose the following satirical witticism? Go yourself.
The studio did not feel like comedy anymore. The lights were still bright, the audience was still seated, and Stephen Colbert was still standing in the same place where he had delivered thousands of jokes before. But this time, his face carried something heavier. He was not leaning into a punchline. He was not chasing applause. He was looking straight into the camera with the quiet seriousness of a man who knew the room was about to hear something larger than late-night television. The story being discussed began with a settlement many viewers had already heard about, but few had seen explained so directly. Paramount, the parent company of CBS, agreed to pay Donald Trump $16 million to settle a lawsuit tied to a 60 Minutes interview. Critics questioned why such a massive media company would settle instead of fighting back.
My mustache comes to you with a heavy heart because while I was on vacation, my parent corporation, Paramount, paid Donald Trump a $16 million settlement over his 60 Minutes lawsuit. As someone who has always been a proud employee of this network, I am offended. And I don't know if anything will ever repair my trust in this company. But just taking a stab at it, I'd say $16 million would help.
Hanging over everything was one uncomfortable question. Was this really about law or about power? Colbert did not soften his word. He framed the settlement as something darker than a normal corporate agreement. What made the moment hit so hard was that he was criticizing his own parent company from inside the network itself. The audience laughed at first, but it was nervous laughter, the kind that fades when people realize the joke carried a serious accusation underneath it. His argument was not really about money. It was about trust. Older Americans remember when television news carried authority, when journalists were expected to challenge presidents instead of protecting them. That memory lingered underneath every line of the segment.
Unlike the payoffs from ABC and Twitter, Paramount's settlement did not include an apology. Instead, that's good. Instead, the corporation released a statement where they said, "You may take our money, but you will never take our dignity. You may, however, purchase our dignity for the low, low price of $16 million. We need the cash." Now, I believe...
Then came the detail that changed the tone completely. Paramount was reportedly seeking approval for a massive merger worth billions of dollars. Suddenly, the $16 million settlement no longer looked random to critics. It looked connected to a larger pressure campaign. The suggestion hanging in the air was that a corporation may have chosen silence over principle because it needed something from regulators. Colbert understood what that implied. Once a network starts balancing truth against business convenience, the audience loses more than a television program. It loses faith. And faith, once damaged, is difficult to rebuild. He never needed to shout. He simply allowed the point to settle into the silence of the room.
Now, I believe this kind of complicated financial settlement with a sitting government official has a technical name in legal circles. It's big fat bribe. Because this all comes as Paramount's owners are trying to get the Trump administration to approve the sale of our network to a new owner, Skydance. Not the music I was expecting? Okay.
The story became even more explosive when CBS later announced that The Late Show would be ending. Officially, the explanation was financial, but the timing immediately raised suspicion. Viewers saw Colbert criticize the settlement, then watched his show land on the chopping block, and many began asking whether this was business, politics, or fear disguised as accounting. That was when Trump's reaction became central. Instead of staying quiet, the segment described him appearing to celebrate the downfall of one of his loudest television critics. The reaction was framed not as confidence, but as revealing. Because when powerful people celebrate too quickly, they sometimes expose more than their critics ever could. The room shifted again. Colbert had raised the question, but Trump's response seemed to make the question louder. If this were truly just a standard business decision, why celebrate it like a political victory? Nobody needed to connect the dots out loud. The facts were already sitting there. $16 million, a network settlement, a merger, a canceled show, and a president openly enjoying it. That is when the story became bigger than Stephen Colbert. It became a warning about what happens when media companies fear political power more than they respect public trust. When comedians feel pressure, journalists notice. When journalists notice, editors become cautious. And when editors become cautious, the public receives a softer, safer version of the truth. For older Americans, that idea cuts especially deep. Many remember a time when television news still tried to stand tall. They remember reporters willing to ask difficult questions and leaders who understood that criticism came with public office. The image of a president celebrating the removal of a television critic does not feel normal to them. It feels like a boundary being crossed. Colbert's power in that moment came from restraint. He did not beg for sympathy or perform outrage. He simply laid the sequence of events in front of the audience and let them decide what it meant. That is why the response felt stronger than anger. He showed the timing, raised the question, and trusted the audience to understand the implication. By the end, the laughter had faded completely. What remained was something colder and more serious. The segment argued that the real issue was not whether one late-night host kept his chair. The real issue was whether truth can survive when billion-dollar corporations and political power begin moving in the same direction. That is the part people will remember. Because noise may dominate a moment, and powerful people may pressure networks, but truth has a way of waiting quietly until the room is finally ready to hear it. And on that night, Stephen Colbert did not need to scream. He simply held up the question America could not ignore. When the powerful start bragging about silence, who will still be brave enough to speak?